So what we're doing here is something that we're forced to do for a couple of reasons on printing a railing that goes around the back of a ship of this era. It is the railing and the deck that surrounds the aft part of the boat. The reason we're having to do this separately is that the model that we're trying to print shows it in place, but the printer is not able to capture it correctly. It does the rest of the boat moderately well for 1/600 scale or whatever this scale happens to be. I think these are actually bigger than 1/600. They're like 1/400, maybe 1/500. And the reason for that is that we're scaling the boats to fit the 2.5-inch hexagon. So there may be, when visually speaking, some boats that you would think, wow, that's an awfully big boat. It's not supposed to be as big as a Galleon. It may be close. We don't want to be too crazy on matching the size, but we do want the boats to be moderately sized for, people's hands to be able to hold them and move them, even though they're going to be mounted to clear bases. So what we're doing here is we're printing the railing that's going to go around the back of the boat, and at some point, the file, the STL file, I'll have to edit and take those railings off if I can. If I can't, I'll just cut them off because they're not printing properly anyway. The rest of the hull of the aft of the boat looks fine, but the railing itself is so tiny that the printer just struggles to get it accurate, and in some cases, well, in most cases, it looks like it's not coming out. It's just a bunch of loose strands all over the place. Well, that's not true. It does come out, but not entirely around all the aft of the boat. So I'm going to just cut it off. And when this is done printing, as you can see here, it's a railing that's going to go around the aft of the boat. Let me zoom in. All right, so now you get a better look at what exactly we're talking about here. It's basically a walking deck with a railing on it, and it's been exaggerated. The posts are exaggerated. The railing itself is exaggerated so that the printer has a little bit better time of printing. Now remember, this is really tiny. And most of the time you would say, what's the point? It's so small. I mean, it's really small. Like it's a millimeter, well, it's about 3 millimeters tall. And the thickness is about 1.25 millimeters. And the printer can handle this kind of thing. But this is the first time we've tried this. And by the way, we are building up to replacing one of the fans in the hot end structure of the printer, but I have deactivated the fan in the software right now, so that noise that we were hearing before, it's not happening because the fan is not spinning. Is that a danger? I don't think so. There was something I did some research on this, and the debate was is a fan for cooling the part, a part cooling fan. Is that fan even necessary? And the answer is, well, depends on what you're printing to cool the part as it's being printed. I don't quite understand why. I suppose maybe I don't quite understand it. Why is that necessary to cool the part? I mean, won't the part just cool on its own? I suppose the thinking is that the heat of the bed and the heat of the hot end, creating an environment of warmth that is going to keep that filament from properly cooling as it's being laid down, which will create issues. Well, we're about to find out, because this thing is really small. It only takes a few minutes to print, and what we're seeing here, let me also adjust this camera view. And as I've said before, having a camera, and I don't know why this is flipped, by the way, because the picture it's flipped. Having a camera showing you the print in front of you and on the computer is really important. It's very helpful, and it's mandatory that you have a manual focus camera. As you see now, it's printing the vertical posts. And remember, those posts are really small. I think they're 0.7 of a millimeter. So we'll see how this thing comes out. And I don't know if I need to keep the recording going, but I can tell you that when it does the top part of the rail, because we're looking at the rail in proper orientation, so bottom to top, when it does the top part of the rail, the actual rail that you would put your hand on as you're walking on the deck, that is a situation where the filament printers are a strand, right? So it's a strand of plastic coming out of the hot end, and if there's no cooling fan, that strand just might fall and become a glob of strands instead of cooling enough as it's being laid down horizontally. Actually, this is going relatively quickly, so let's just go ahead and watch it as it's doing each individual post. And a good testament or test of your printer is how well vertical things like a post are printed. It's also part of the test, troubleshooting guides and so on to an Ender 3 to see how the filament is laid down, how accurate it is to create a cylindrical object. And in this case, these are almost like putting down supports. So maybe the horizontal bar might be supported enough that it'll come out okay. And so when this is done, I'll take the camera and put it on the ship and show you what we've had to deal with. Actually, I can show you now, but it may not come out very well. Here's the ship. You see that railing? I don't want to have to mess with the focus, but I will when I get down to it. But there's the railing right there in the back of the ship. And that's the railing that didn't come out. Actually, on that side, it did come out. But on this side of the ship, it has deteriorated. You know what? Actually, let me see if I can adjust the focus on this, because this will be a good example how good that focus is. Not bad. Okay, yeah, there you go. That's good focus right there. That's a good camera. So you see how it came apart? Now you might say, oh, is that a really big deal? It's not a big deal, but you know what? You want to have something that looks pretty, and having that railing go around like that is kind of cool. So you see how, there you go. You see how it's supposed to be? And it fell apart. And you also, by the way, you see the cannons? Again, a barrel is a cylindrical object horizontally, and those didn't come out that well, so I exaggerated their size. Those barrels are going to be bigger in the next print. And by the way, those ports are closed, and I haven't yet got skill to create open areas in a STL. There are instructions for doing it, but you know, it's a square hole. So I got the barrels in there, but they're tiny, and I've exaggerated them in the last print. There's an example right there of a cylindrical object that's vertical. You can see my my resolution is pretty darn good. That's a 0.24, I believe, maybe 0.23 resolution, and then the horizontal objects, again, it's a tube or it's a bar. You can see that they came out pretty good. Why? Because the sails themselves are becoming the support for that horizontal bar. So the sail will come out pretty good. Now you might say, why bother printing the sails? Well, that's the reason. Because that plastic becomes the support for the horizontal beam. If I were to not print those, I wouldn't be able to do this. I'd have to lay the mast down on the platen, print the mast, and then apply it to the ship. And having discovered this model, the ship is one print, print and play, fire and forget. So that's what these are. And again, I don't even know if that's a 1/600, 400, but it's about 2.5 inches, maybe a little bit longer for this Galleon. And we'll now see the result of our print. Well, we can see it right there on screen. All right, so let's have a look. I use an X-Acto blade to get underneath, and that came off really easy, so that's a cause for some concern. And I have to use the X-Acto blade as well. So let me get the camera down here. Okay, that came out pretty good. We're going to remove it from the raft. I always print with a raft, by the way. Sometimes it's easier said than done, because by removing the raft, you can crack the object, and I want to avoid that. It looks like it's not going to cooperate, so I'm going to have to wait. Let me move this. There may be portions of it that are hard to remove, so you have to be careful. All right. That's a success. And now we're going to take it and put it on the back of the boat. Tell you what, we'll use let's use the boat we were looking at. Now I guessed of these dimensions. This is a first print, and I'll be damned if that isn't really, really close. So I'm going to cut off the old rail. And this is a lot easier said than done, and it's very delicate. You see the blade? See the thumb? Danger. So this plastic is a lot harder than it appears. But fortunately, because this damn thing is so small, see how that just kind of broke? The railing, the plastic that's applied is so small, it's like maybe 1.5 millimeters, that it's kind of easy to cut. But don't let that fool you. Could you use a hot blade? Yeah, but then the plastic would melt into a glob. All right, so I'm going to cut off this extra, and we'll see how I did. I have a feeling this is going to be way better than I thought it was going to be. As I said, this plastic is way harder than you can imagine. It is not like a miniature plastic, a miniatures plastic. It is much harder. And I have to be careful on a couple of levels. First of all, be careful of the flying plastic. Be careful as you hold the piece that you don't snap a mast. Though that's not exactly a big deal. Just push with your thumb. Get your other finger out of the way. Now, if you had a Dremel tool, sure, could you do that? Well, here's what I've discovered with the Dremel tool. The Dremel tool and its various grinding wheels melts the plastic before it shaves it. So that is actually a problem. Could you use a different type of grit? Well, you could, but I've tried several and they all seem to melt before they shave. In other words, the speed, could I reduce the speed? Is there a bunch of settings? Yeah, probably. Okay, we're ready. So there's the back of our boat, and we're going to put our railing on. Well, let's see how we did. Let's put it up here high first. And again, it's an exaggerated size and length. And there is some flexibility in the plastic. That is a success. So, see the difference? It's an attractive deck that goes around the back of the boat. It's a little long. Like, for instance, it probably should be cut right about here. So for this size model, that is long, and I'll just snap it off. And then I'll get my hot glue gun ready. And you know what? The remnants of the other are just in the way. So I'm going to shave this up. Maybe I'll get the Dremel tool. And make that smooth. As I said, you gotta be really careful with the shavings coming off. Yeah, you know what? I wonder if I should just go ahead and leave it that size. You watch as I do this, it'll probably break, but that's okay. Okay, here I'm checking the dimensions and it's not angled like the aft of the boat. I will fix that. Looks like it needs to be angled by about maybe not. Maybe just by squeezing it and then hot gluing it in position. Yeah, it's too long. All right, so we'll come back with the result once we fix it up. Okay, here is the result of the ship. Let me get this enlarged a little bit. I see there's a hole in the hull, a little delta shape. I don't know why that's there. Remember, I didn't adjust this for the angle of the aft. I just forced it and let it bend to the correct shape. Not bad. I admit it's a little hard to get this angle visually to work. Okay, here we go. So you see here, that gives you the impression of that railing that goes all the way back to the aft of the ship, and also it's really exaggerated. So that railing, by the size of the ship, would be almost the height of a person, which is interesting. That tells you the height of a figure if you wanted to put figures on your boat in this scale. But all in all, I mean, when you look at it on the table, let's get a better, back to our normal focus. Get an idea. So, again, it's aesthetics, and the way it looks is good. It gives you a good impression, and it alleviates that problem of printing that kind of a fairly sophisticated rail or a small object in a dimension that is mostly contrary to the action of an FDM printer. It's hard to produce that kind of a thing with that kind of a gap structure around the hull. And that's why, although I give everybody credit who has developed these FDM printers, there's a certain limit to what you can do. And besides, remember, this is really small. If this was printed at a larger scale, like right now, let me just show you with a ruler what we're talking about. So, front of the hull. Three inches, not including any of the structures that are extending beyond that distance. But you know what? When this gets painted up and everything, that's damn good. And of course, the cost is zero. Obviously, not including the cost of the printer and the filament. But the fact of the matter is, it took me 2 hours to print this. This boat was, I think, 2.5 hours. And why did it take that long? Because I'm printing it as good a resolution as I want to afford. I could print it at 0.18, 0.19, but I went to 0.2, I believe, 0.21 or 22 on this. So it took 2.5 hours to print, and let me tell you, 5 nights, 2.5 hours, print, fire and forget. By the end of 5 nights, you got 5 ships. So there we are. Not bad at all.